What are you as a woman most concerned about? If you are her husband, her brother, or a friend, how can you be a support to her? Dr. Eudine Barriteau, who is a member of the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, will be my guest in less than a minute to talk about so many issues affecting women. Also in this program, you're going to hear from a young man who just graduated from Buffalo State University and is about to use what he has learned in college to benefit young men in Brooklyn. But we start with Dr. Eudine Barriteau. Dr. Barriteau, welcome to Brooklyn 45.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taitt. Thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Let's begin by talking about this United Nations Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, which so many women have never heard about. So what is this organization?
This organization was set up as one of 3 human rights commissions established by the United Nations with a specific focus on women all over the world. And as you know, there's a global South, there is North America, there's Europe, there's Africa, there's Asia, there's of course the Caribbean and Latin America. And in each region, women face different forms of discrimination. And so what this United Nations Committee on Elimination of Discrimination seeks to do is to create a more equal playing field for women, to remove punitive conditions that affect women. And these differ from region to region and country to country.
We are taping this program from New York, which is the American region, I believe. And you are speaking to us from Barbados in the Caribbean, which is another region.
Yes.
Those issues that affect Barbados, in fact, that affect the Caribbean and affect the United States, are they different issues or are they relatively the same issues?
They tend to differ in many ways. The Caribbean countries, former Anglophone Caribbean countries, have certain legislation on the books that were more progressive at the time of its introduction than the United States. And one of the things that is also very interesting is that although the United Nations is headquartered in New York, the committee that I will sit on from January 2025 is headquartered in Geneva. The United States has not signed the convention. In fact, the United States has not signed any of the conventions, but the Caribbean governments have introduced, in varying degrees, very progressive legislation that help women. So you find that a lot of the discrimination against women, they coalesce around ideological issues affecting whether people think women have a right to be there. But certainly in most Caribbean countries, certainly Barbados, and I would say Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago and the OECS states, Grenada, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Dominica, Antigua, all of those, St. Kitts, Nevis, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines, they have legislation that speak to equal pay for equal work in the public service. It varies in the private sector. But again, you may find that although you have that there, women may not be promoted in the same degree, even though they're deserving. In other countries, it may be that women do not have the right to go to school. Women don't have the right to have a bank account. Women in Saudi Arabia in 2018, women were given the right to drive for the first time in 2018. So you see, it really varies across the different regions. And CEDAW, once countries sign the convention, they are saying to their women and men, citizens of that country and to the world, we want to change things for women. Of course, signing the treaty and the protocol is another thing as to whether or not they do so. And hence the committee evaluates reports submitted by countries every 4 years.
You use the acronym CEDAW.
Yes.
And we're probably going to be you're probably going to be talking about CEDAW quite a lot. So for our viewers, CEDAW is the, tell me that again,
it's the
convention.
it is both a convention and a committee, and they both say the same thing. The convention that countries ratify is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, and the committee I sit on is called the Committee that monitors all the elimination of discrimination against women, and they both say CEDAW. So it's a convention, and they have a committee made up of 22 women, and I think there is one man drawn from across the world.
Here in the United States, we've been hearing, especially at this time, quite a lot about reproductive rights. Talk to me about that.
Well, I think it, and I listened to the debate in the United States, and I was quite surprised in one sense with the reversal, but reproductive rights say that women have a right to have the autonomy over their bodies. I mean, if you carry a baby, if you need health care around carrying a baby or miscarrying a baby, then you should make that determination. I certainly believe that you should make that determination about what happens to your bodies. But reproductive rights is far greater than having the right to abortion or having the right to medical care in case you go into a spontaneous abortion. You may need help in getting pregnant. That is also part of reproductive rights. You may need help in terminating a very difficult pregnancy. I certainly believe if a child is raped, someone like 11 or 12, you cannot alter that little child's life by having her carry that baby. In Barbados, abortion has been legal since 1981. And in Jamaica, whereas abortion is not legal, there's an interesting clause in the legislation that says abortion is prohibited unless a doctor determines the life of the woman is at risk. So that gives an out for the doctor to perform the abortion, but unfortunately, it then becomes whether a woman can afford it. So it tends to be middle class and higher income women who can afford that, say in the context of Jamaica. Certainly not the kind of legislation that is available in Barbados.
Let's talk about the United States. And you said the United States has not signed on to the convention as yet.
No, in fact, the United States hasn't signed on to any of the conventions because the United States, not only the CEDAW convention, there are 6 or 7 countries that have not signed on the CEDAW convention. And regrettably, the United States is in the company of some really, I would say, backward countries for different reasons. The United States as a country thinks that it is sovereign and it should not be subjected to the regulations of the United Nations. But the United States participates in the United Nations, as you well know, in different bodies, and many of the lawyers that monitor CEDAW are in fact United States lawyers. So the United States, it has not signed the CEDAW treaty, but individual members of United States citizens certainly participate and make their legal expertise available for women for different countries of the world.
Citizens use their legal expertise. But
definitely.
What about United States citizens? People in Brooklyn, people all over the United States.
The United States citizens cannot bring a claim before CEDAW because the United States as a body is not part of CEDAW. So for example, say in Barbados has to report, or Grenada, the Caribbean countries, because they have all signed at different times. They have to report to CEDAW every 4 years. If there's a group of women in Barbados who think that they are discriminated against, Barbados as a sovereign country will submit a report to CEDAW, and the CEDAW committee will review it. But a Barbadian group of women can, or a Trinidadian group of women or whatever, can then submit their own individual report to CEDAW and say, look, we are citizens of this country, but we don't have, good conditions of work. And CEDAW will listen to them because their country signed on. So what signing the convention says, first it says to the world, this country is very willing to respect the rights of women and to abide by what the recommendations that come out when the committee evaluates the report. and this and the citizens of that country, they have every right to file or to provide evidence to CEDAW about whether or not what the government says is exactly as it is reported. So that again is extremely progressive for Caribbean countries, which are often described as third world and so on.
So if women here in the United States have concerns, how do they get these concerns addressed other
They
than
have to they have to deal with it at the national level. They cannot take it to CEDAW because there isn't a mechanism for CEDAW to evaluate, review, have anything to say about what, I mean, you can comment, but the CEDAW body, I as a concerned Caribbean woman could say, I am concerned about what is happening in the United States for women, but I cannot speak, well, CEDAW speaks as a collective. So when I sit with the body, the chair of the committee would put out a report. So we will never put out a report on the conditions affecting women in the United States because CEDAW is not part of not CEDAW. The United States is not part of CEDAW.
Let's talk about economic empowerment for women.
Yes,
And
very important.
so talk to me about how you feel about that and how the United Nations feel about that.
Well, I think it is critical, especially given the context of countries, again, in the global South, the Caribbean, where women have always worked. When I mean, when I was a graduate student in the United States and looking at the feminist literature, a lot of white women in the 60s wanted to be liberated from the household. They wanted to get a chance to go out and work. You know, that a lot of the women's movement in the 60s in the United States, led by women like Betty Friedan, say women want a chance to work. And I, as a graduate student, was saying women in the Caribbean want a chance to go home and put up their feet. Black women have not stopped working since they have touched down in the Caribbean 600 years ago. Neither have Indian women who come much later. But although Black women have always worked, and Indian women and women from the global South, the conditions of work have not always been good. So a lot of economic empowerment is to ensure that women have great conditions of work on the job wherever they are. It is not to deny men opportunity to work, because all workers, whether men or women, should have great conditions of work. But because women have been the more recent entrants to the workplace historically, women have not always had great conditions of work. So you may find that I remember reading something about when Shirley Chisholm joined the U.S. Congress, where the bathrooms were for women in the Congress as opposed to men. And Dianne Feinstein, the bathroom for female senators was up a corridor and down somewhere else, because historically women were not part of the Senate of the United States until the 20th century. So a lot of what, and the early 20th century, so a lot of what had to be put in place were add-ons. The same happened to women in Barbados and the Caribbean. The first woman in Barbados to enter parliament was Ermi Bourne from the constituency of St. Andrew. But again, governments successively have taken broad measures to correct the built-in inequalities that existed for women. But a lot of what lingered was the perception of their relevance. Of course, perceptions influence reality. So if you think, if you always think a woman has someone to pay her bills, whether it is true or not, you wouldn't think that she deserves a fair wage. And so I think economic empowerment help everyone. If a woman works for more money, her family would benefit. If she's married and she has children, that salary benefits. And if she's a single woman, she enjoys a higher quality of life.
You mentioned Shirley Chisholm a short while ago.
Yes.
And the name that is on the lips of almost everyone in the United States, a woman, is Kamala Harris. Now, Shirley Chisholm was unsuccessful in her bid to become president of the United States.
Yes.
Lots of people are hoping that Kamala Harris will turn that around.
Yes.
But there's been a lot of criticism of Ms. Harris by one of her opponents. His name begins with T.
Aha, that
And
opponent.
I'm sure that you've been reading about some of his comments about her.
Yes.
And apparently he has a feeling that a woman should not be in this highest position in the United States. How do you feel about a woman in the United States becoming president?
I am certainly looking forward to it. I am hoping she's very successful. We know that women are very competent. She's very experienced. She has been an attorney general for California, and before that, a district attorney, I understand. She has been vice president for 4 years. I have seen the Senate hearings when she grilled the Supreme Court, the persons applying to be Supreme Court justices, and other persons appearing. She's bright, she's smart, she's intelligent. But that opponent has a problem with accepting the brilliance and intelligence of women generally, and it seems that Black women drive him crazy because, again, I think he has not fully examined the fact that very overt tendencies within him as it relates to women and women of color. And she's more than worthy to be commander-in-chief and to be president of the United States. And I'm hoping the voters in the United States would certainly put her there because she certainly would be a far greater representative of that great country than that opponent whose name begins with T.
And you are not a stranger to the United States at all. You were educated here in the United States, and you worked here in the United States at the United Nations.
Yeah, in fact, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go on.
I was just saying, I just left there. I spent 3 weeks in Washington, D.C. and returned on Sunday. And I did my master's at NYU in Manhattan and my PhD at Howard University in Washington, D.C. So I'm very familiar with the United States, both its strengths and its weaknesses and its contradictions. And I think it is a great country and it has a contribution to make. I certainly admire the workings of its political systems, not always the politicians who occupy the positions, but the system itself. When you strip away the politicians and you look at the organic structure, I think that it has many great institutions and levers to ensure democracy and participation. Of course, as we know, politicians play with those all the time.
We hear quite a bit about violence against women here in this country, and I don't know if that is a problem in the Caribbean as well, but what is the United Nations take on violence against women, and how are they protecting women who suffer from violent attacks?
CEDAW is particularly concerned with violence against women and have drawn up a specific set of recommendations just on that topic. Violence against women is a scourge everywhere, in the United States, in the Caribbean, in Latin America, Asia, Africa, and of course it takes many different forms. There's the violence of intimate partner violence, there's economic violence, there's the violence of war. We see that in Haiti, for instance, given the pivotal role women play in holding societies together. When you have any civil unrest, women still try to keep their families together. And if you have endless shooting and horrible violence, then they're the ones who have to pick up the pieces. The United Nations has come up with a number of recommendations, but the way CEDAW works, after it makes these recommendations, the countries have to implement. And again, when you think of what has historically been wrong for women, you could think of it as both material and ideological. Material is denial of access, legislation that prohibits unequal pay. And those governments have been able to correct more readily. When you think of ideological relations of gender, for instance, it is whether or not but she's a woman, should she be prime minister, or should she be president, or she's a woman. Her relevance is often still, does she have any children? Can she cook? Really simplistic things that affect, and those are harder to change, but we have to recognize it. And a lot of times men in their frustration take out their dissatisfactions on women in terms of intimate partner violence. What we need is both women and men accepting, and there are women who are violent too, and that is also wrong. There should be no violence. People don't own each other. People should not upset each other and batter each other. Regrettably, more men are violent to women, but there are some women who are violent to men, and that is equally wrong because we have to reach a more common ground of understanding and working conflict out.
We have just about a minute left, and I want to ask you to talk for 30 seconds about the problems faced by adolescent girls.
A period of adolescence is really very challenging. You're coming into your own, finding out who you are, facing a lot of peer pressure. And I think the way for young women and young men to deal with that is to have a solid foundation built by parents before the period of adolescence sets in. So that when those crazy hormones start jumping through the body and you start caring more about what your friends think than what your mommy and daddy think, then it's you know, that building that foundation before you get there kicks in and provides a support. But I think we have to stay with young people. They're the future, they're the hope, and not give up on them and find a way to work with them.
Yes, that's so important.
It
Professor Dr. Eudine Barriteau, you used to be president of the University of the West Indies of Barbados, the Cayfield campus in Barbados.
Yes.
You are now not the head of the University of the West Indies there, but you are still doing work on behalf of kids, on behalf of adolescent girls and adolescent boys, on behalf of all women. I want to thank you for being our guest here on Brooklyn 45. And we look forward to having you back again. And we hope that when you come back again, the United States will understand that women are important and that they need to do something to address women's concerns.
Thank you very much. And who knows, maybe a woman president in the United States may just change that. That would be wonderful. Although I feel when it comes to that, it just may not, but I'm hopeful. And thank you very much to you and your team for having me. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Jadil Haqq has just graduated from the Buffalo State University, and he's planning to use what he has learned at Buffalo State to help young men in Brooklyn. Jadil, welcome to Brooklyn 45.
Thank you for having me, brother.
What are your major concerns about young men in Brooklyn?
So one of my major concerns, I would say it starts with the parents. I feel that the motto has always been save the children, but I feel that if the parents don't have a concept or a knowledge of self, then their kids would follow that they may they may not have a future as well.
So how do you plan to connect parents with these young men?
So in my organization, and I like to look at it as more as a concept or a people's movement, an idea. And this idea had emerged from the conditions that I've seen in my community. So in terms of bridging the gap, it encompasses a lot aspects of economically, but the main important thing is educationally and spirituality. So when it comes down to more so economically, I would say people may face limited job opportunities, which could create hardship. So I would offer programs not just only in my nonprofit, but also I'm working on a partnership with a school and incorporating financial literacy within the curriculum or after school program, and mentorship as well, where both parents and youth and the youth can gain the tools that they need to thrive.
Where did this idea for your planned not-for-profit come from?
So like I had stated a little bit before, the inspiration had came from seeing the challenges in my community, which stems from uh lack of educational resources, a disconnect from culture and spiritual roots. And I realized that all of these issues were interconnected, and I feel like I couldn't address just addressing one aspect wouldn't be enough. So my idea really came from wanting to create a space that nurtures all my brothers and sisters in a way that empowers them to grow and thrive.
Well, I'm sure that Brooklyn residents are happy to see you and they like what you are doing. Talk to me a little bit, we've got just about a minute left, about your planned not-for-profit and how do you plan to get it off the ground?
So right now, I'm working on an a fundraiser, and the fundraiser right now is still, the nonprofit is still in the foundational spaces. So it's heavily reliant on community and have not just, you know, financially, but, you know, like letting the people know like this not just benefits you and I, but future generations to come. So a lot of, I would say, like, you know, resources and backing is really strongly from the community.
What was your degree in?
My degree was in Bachelor's in Science of Criminal Justice.
Okay, well, I want to thank you for being on Brooklyn 45, and we look forward to hearing about your not-for-profit and the work that you are doing on behalf of all these young men in Brooklyn.
Thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Jadil Haqq. You also heard from Dr. Eudine Barriteau, who is a member of the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And to you, our viewers, we thank you for watching this program. You can watch it again on our YouTube channel. We invite you to support Brooklyn 45 with a gift, a donation. And when you donate to Brooklyn 45, you benefit, and our communities benefit as well. So please tell your family, friends, and your work colleagues to watch Brooklyn 45 programs and to support us. Be a part of what we do. On behalf of our Brooklyn 45 team, I am Sam Taitt.